The engine died with a cough, a shudder, and then a final, wheezing sigh. It was a sound I knew too well, the death rattle of a hope I'd been nursing for the last 300 miles. I let my forehead rest against the steering wheel, the cracked vinyl cool against my skin. Outside, the sun beat down on the asphalt, turning the air into a shimmering, visible thing. The truck, a 1978 Ford F-150, the color of a faded sky, was more than just a vehicle. It was the last tangible piece of my grandfather, a rolling museum of oil stains and memories, and it had chosen to expire in the middle of nowhere, a place called Harmony Creek. The name felt like a cruel joke. For an hour, I did what any man with a liberal arts degree and zero mechanical skill would do. I popped the hood, stared at the greasy labyrinth of wires and metal as if I could diagnose it with sheer willpower, and then kicked a tire. It didn't help. My phone had no signal. The road stretched in two directions, both identical ribbons of black disappearing into a haze of heat and pine trees. I was stranded. Loneliness was a familiar coat, one I wore most days, but this was different. This was a physical, oppressive isolation, underscored by the buzzing of insects and the slow drip of something vital from beneath the truck. My life back in the city had become a series of quiet, predictable loops. Wake up, work from my spare bedroom, stare at the same four walls, order takeout, sleep. I told myself this trip was about scattering some of Grandpa's ashes at his favorite fishing spot up north. A final goodbye. But I knew, in the quiet hum of the refrigerator at 3 in the morning, that it was about running. I just wasn't sure what from. Maybe from the silence of my apartment, or the ghost of a relationship that had evaporated a year ago, leaving behind nothing but a spare toothbrush and a lingering sense of failure. I was a passive observer in my own life, and now, my life was a broken-down truck on the shoulder of a forgotten highway. Eventually, a pickup truck older than mine rumbled past, slowed, and then reversed with a squeal of brakes. An old man with a face like a road map and a sweat-stained hat leaned out. He squinted at me, then at my truck. "She give up the ghost?" he asked, his voice a gravelly drawl. "Something like that," I admitted, feeling the flush of uselessness creep up my neck. "Town's 2 miles ahead. Got one mechanic. Miles. He's good, but he's quiet." The old man pointed a gnarled finger down the road. "Garage is right on the main drag. Can't miss it. Only 1 inch." He offered me a ride, and I took it, climbing into a cab that smelled of hay and old coffee. The ride was short, the conversation shorter. He dropped me at a low, cinder-block building with a single bay door rolled up to reveal a shadowy interior. A faded sign above it read Harmony Creek Auto Repair. There was no flash, no corporate branding, just honest, sun-bleached paint. It felt like stepping back in time. I walked into the cool darkness of the garage, my eyes adjusting from the glare. The air was thick with the holy trinity of masculine scents: gasoline, oil, and something metallic and sharp. Tools were arranged with a meticulousness that bordered on art, hanging from pegboards in perfect, descending order of size. In the center of the clean-swept concrete floor, a man was bent over the open engine of a sedan, his back to me. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of a simple gray t-shirt. His jeans were worn and stained, his boots scuffed. He moved with an unhurried, confident grace, his hands, covered in black grease, navigating the engine's guts with a surgeon's precision. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me?" He didn't startle. He simply finished tightening something with a wrench, the metallic click echoing in the quiet space, before slowly straightening up. He turned, and I felt my breath catch. He wasn't movie star handsome, not in that polished, symmetrical way. His face was all angles and planes, his jaw strong, his hair a dark, unruly mess. But it was his eyes that held me. They were a deep, clear brown, and they looked at me with a calm, unnerving steadiness. There was no judgment, no curiosity, just a quiet, patient assessment. He was probably my age, maybe a few years older, but he seemed to possess a stillness that I'd never managed to find. "My truck broke down," I said, the words sounding flimsy and inadequate. "A couple miles out of town. An old F-150-inch. He picked up a red rag from a nearby bench and began wiping his hands, the movements slow and deliberate. He didn't scrub. He just methodically cleaned each finger, his gaze never leaving mine. The silence stretched, and I felt an absurd need to fill it, to explain myself, to apologize for interrupting his work, for existing in his space. An old man gave me a ride, I added, gesturing vaguely back toward the road. He said you were the person to see. He finally finished with his hands, tossing the rag onto the bench. The grease was gone, but the lines on his palms were etched in black. He walked toward his own truck, a beast of a thing parked just outside the bay door. It was as old as mine, but looked like it could pull a mountain. He didn't say a word, just slid into the driver's seat. The springs creaked under his weight. He leaned over, his arms stretching across the worn bench seat, and patted the spot beside him. His voice, when it finally came, was a low, quiet rumble that seemed to vibrate right through the concrete floor. "Hop in beside me." It wasn't a question. It was a simple statement of fact and instruction. And for the first time in a very long time, I did exactly as I was told without overthinking it. I got in. The cab was clean but lived in. It smelled like him. That faint, not unpleasant scent of motor oil, mixed with something else, something clean and warm, like sawdust and sun-dried laundry. He put the truck in gear, and we drove toward my broken-down past, the silence between us more comfortable than any conversation I'd had in months. We found my truck looking sad and abandoned on the side of the road. Miles pulled up behind it, the engine of his own truck a low, confident thrum. He got out and walked around mine, his steps measured. He didn't pop the hood. He just looked at it, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to a story only he could hear. He ran a hand along a rusted fender, his touch surprisingly gentle. I stood there, feeling like a nervous parent waiting for a doctor's diagnosis. "She's a 78, he said, not looking at me. It was the first full sentence he directed my way. "My grandfather's," I replied. He bought it new. He nodded once, a short, sharp dip of his chin. He finally opened the hood and leaned in. I watched the muscles in his back shift under his shirt. He was completely absorbed, his focus absolute. I felt like an intruder again, a tourist in his world of tangible problems and real solutions. My own problems were abstract, formless anxieties that couldn't be fixed with a wrench. After a few minutes of silent probing, he straightened up, wiping his hands on the ever-present red rag he'd tucked into his back pocket. "Fuel pump shot," he said, "and your carburetor needs a rebuild. Probably been running rough for a while." He was right. It had been. I'd just been ignoring it, turning up the radio to drown out the sputtering. A perfect metaphor for my life. "Can you fix it?" I asked, the question laced with a desperation that embarrassed me. "I can fix anything," he said. It wasn't a boast. It was a statement of capability, as simple and true as the sky being blue. "But I'll have to order the parts. This is Harmony Creek. We don't exactly have a classic Ford parts depot down the street." He finally looked at me, and I saw a flicker of something in his steady gaze. Not pity. Maybe understanding. "It'll take a few days. Maybe 4. Maybe 5 inch. 5 days. Stranded in a town with one street, one diner, and one quiet mechanic. My carefully planned escape to the north was officially derailed. A wave of panic washed over me, followed by an odd sense of relief. The decision was out of my hands. For the next 5 days, I had no choice but to be still. "There's a motel at the end of town," he said, already hooking up my truck to his. "The Pinecone. It's clean." The slight hesitation before the word clean told me everything I needed to know. He towed my grandfather's truck back to his garage, maneuvering it into the bay with an expert's touch. I paid the tow fee in cash, and he wrote me a receipt on a carbon paper pad, his handwriting a surprisingly neat, blocky print. The transaction felt formal, creating a distance between us that hadn't been there in the cab of his truck. He was the mechanic. I was the customer. The Pinecone Motel was exactly as he described it. The room was small, smelled faintly of bleach and pine-scented cleaner, and the television had a coat hanger for an antenna. I spent the first day in a state of restless boredom, pacing the small room, trying and failing to get a signal on my laptop. I walked the town's single street twice, which took all of 15 minutes. I ate a sad, gray hamburger at the diner. By evening, the 4 walls of the motel room were closing in on me. I felt the old, familiar hum of anxiety starting up in my chest. The next morning, I couldn't stand it anymore. I walked back to the garage. Miles was already there, working on a different car, the radio playing a low, classic rock station. He glanced up as I approached, his hands not pausing in their work. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied, hovering awkwardly at the edge of the bay. "Just thought I'd check in. See if the parts were ordered." It was a flimsy excuse. He'd told me he'd call me. He nodded, not looking up. "Ordered them yesterday. Should have a tracking number later today." An awkward silence fell. I should have just left, gone back to my pine-scented prison cell. But I couldn't. I was drawn to the quiet competence of this place, to the way he moved, the way he existed so completely in the present moment. "You need a hand with anything?" I asked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I immediately regretted it. What help could I possibly be? I could barely identify a screwdriver. He finally stopped what he was doing and looked at me. He looked at my clean hands, my city dweller's canvas sneakers. A small smile, barely a twitch of his lips, appeared for a fraction of a second. "You know anything about cars?" "Absolutely nothing," I admitted, my face heating up. He considered this for a moment. I expected him to laugh, to send me on my way. Instead, he pointed to a pile of old tires in the corner. "You can move those to the back. Stack them neat." And so began my tenure as the unpaid, unskilled assistant at Harmony Creek Auto Repair. My job, for the most part, was to stay out of the way. I swept the floors. I organized bolts and screws into little plastic bins. I stacked tires. It was mindless, physical work, and it was a balm to my overactive brain. For hours, I could just focus on the task at hand, the simple satisfaction of creating order from chaos. But mostly I watched him. I learned the rhythm of his day. He worked with a steady, unhurried pace, never rushing, never making a wasted movement. He'd tackle a problem, his brow furrowed in concentration, his lower lip caught between his teeth. And then, when he found the solution, his whole body would relax slightly, a subtle shift in his shoulders that I came to recognize as a sign of victory. He didn't talk much, but the garage wasn't silent. It was filled with the sounds of his work, the clang of metal, the hiss of the pneumatic wrench, the low hum of the radio, and underneath it all, the soft, steady sound of his breathing. I started to notice the small things. The way the sun, slanting through the high, dusty windows of the garage, would catch the silver threads in his dark hair. The intricate map of scars and calluses on his hands, a history of his life written on his skin. He had a tattoo on his right forearm, a simple black band, partially obscured by grease and arm hair. I wondered about its story. He drank his coffee black, from a chipped ceramic mug that said, "World's okayest mechanic." He ate his lunch at noon, always the same thing. A sandwich wrapped in wax paper and an apple, which he ate standing by his workbench, staring out at the road. He never seemed lonely, just self-contained, a world unto himself. My analysis of him became an obsession. Every small action was a clue to be deciphered. When he handed me a rag, did his fingers linger against mine for a second too long, or was I just imagining it? When he looked up from his work and caught me watching him, was the look in his eyes annoyance, or was it something else, something unreadable that made my stomach flutter? He had this way of looking at me, a direct, unwavering gaze that felt like it was stripping away all my layers of irony and self-protection. It was terrifying and exhilarating. One afternoon, I was trying to loosen a particularly stubborn bolt on an old lawnmower he'd told me I could tinker with. I was straining, my knuckles white, my face red with effort. Suddenly, a shadow fell over me. Miles was standing behind me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You're turning it the wrong way," he said, his voice a low murmur near my ear. My entire body went rigid. I could smell the scent of soap and oil on his skin. He reached around me, his arm brushing against mine, his chest pressing lightly against my back. He placed his large, warm hand over mine on the wrench. "Lefty loosey," he said, his breath ghosting across my neck. He guided my hand, and with a small grunt of effort from both of us, the bolt broke free with a sharp crack. For a moment, we stayed like that, his hand over mine, his body a solid presence behind me. My heart was hammering against my ribs. It was the most intimate contact I'd had with another person in over a year, and it was happening in a greasy garage over a broken lawnmower. Then, just as quickly, he stepped back. The space where he had been felt suddenly cold. "There you go," he said, his voice back to its normal, neutral tone. He walked back to the car he was working on as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. The air had changed. The casual, functional touch had felt anything but casual to me. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze, my mind replaying the moment over and over. The weight of his hand, the warmth of his body, the sound of his voice in my ear. I was reading into it. I had to be. He was just being helpful. He was a mechanic, and I was a customer who didn't know which way to turn a bolt. It was that simple. It wasn't that simple. That evening, I didn't go back to the motel. I stayed, helping him clean up the shop as the sun went down, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. We worked in a comfortable silence, moving around each other in a now familiar rhythm. When the last tool was wiped down and hung in its proper place, he pulled 2 beers from a small fridge in the corner and handed one to me. "Thanks for the help," he said, leaning against his workbench. "I'm not sure I was much help," I said, taking a sip of the cold beer. "It tasted like heaven." "You kept the floor clean," he said. And for the second time, I saw that ghost of a smile. "That's more than most people do." We stood there for a while, drinking our beers as the sky outside turned from orange to a deep, bruised purple. The cicadas started their evening chorus. I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me, a quiet contentment I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't thinking about my empty apartment, or my stalled career, or the ashes in the box under the seat of my truck. I was just there, in a quiet garage with a quiet man, and for the first time, it felt like enough. "So what's your story, city boy?" he asked, his voice soft in the growing darkness. The question caught me off guard. I'd spent so much time observing him, I'd forgotten I could be observed, too. "Not much of a story," I said, shrugging. "I'm a graphic designer. I work from home. My grandfather died a few months ago, and I was heading north to his favorite fishing spot." I gestured vaguely with my beer bottle. "This truck was his." He nodded, his eyes on the bottle in my hand. "Sorry about your grandfather." "Thanks. Must have been a good man," he said, his gaze shifting to my broken-down Ford. "Took good care of his truck." "He took good care of everything," I said, a lump forming in my throat. I hadn't talked about my grandfather with anyone. Not really. But here, in the dim light of the garage, it felt easy. He taught me how to read, how to skip stones. He was solid, you know, like a rock. Miles was quiet for a long moment, just looking at me with that steady, unreadable expression. I felt like he was seeing right through me, to the lonely, scared kid I still was on the inside. "Yeah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I know," and I believed he did. The parts for my truck were delayed. A shipping error, the website said. It meant another 2 days, at least. When Miles told me, I should have been annoyed, frustrated. Instead, a secret, shameful wave of relief washed over me. 2 more days. 2 more days of sweeping floors and stacking tires. 2 more days of watching him work, of existing in his quiet orbit. The routine we'd fallen into became the anchor of my days. I'd show up at the garage around 9, after a solitary breakfast at the diner. He'd already be there, the bay door rolled up, the radio murmuring. He'd grunt a greeting, and I'd grab the broom. We rarely spoke more than a few necessary words during the day. "Pass me the half-inch socket, watch your head, lunch," but the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with a shared understanding, a comfortable proximity that felt more intimate than any conversation. I was learning his language, the language of action, not words. I learned that a slight tightening of his jaw meant a bolt was refusing to budge. I learned that a quick, sharp exhale meant a problem was finally solved. I learned that when he pushed his hair back from his forehead with the back of a greasy wrist, it meant he was tired, the day was getting long. These were his micro-expressions, his tells, and I cataloged each one like a rare discovery. One sweltering afternoon, he was wrestling with the engine of an old tractor that some local farmer had dragged in. He was lying on a creeper, halfway under the massive machine, grunting with exertion. Sweat dripped from his temples, carving clean paths through the grime on his skin. "Leo," he called out, his voice muffled. It was the first time he'd used my name. It sounded different in his low rumble, solid and real. "Yeah," I said, walking over. "Need you to get in the cab. When I tell you, turn the key. Don't start it, just turn it to on." I squeezed into the dusty, sun-baked cab. It smelled of earth and diesel. I put my hand on the key, my heart thumping a stupid, frantic rhythm. I was intensely aware of him beneath me, of the trust he was placing in me not to screw this up. "Okay, now," he yelled. I turned the key. The dashboard lights flickered on with a weak chime. Okay, off. I turned it off. Again. We did this 4 or 5 times. Finally, he slid out from under the tractor on the creeper, his face smeared with black grease, but a look of triumph in his eyes. Got it, he said, sitting up. He looked at me, still sitting in the tractor's cab, and that rare, almost smile touched his lips again. See? You're useful after all. The praise, small as it was, landed in my chest like a warm stone. I had contributed. I was part of the solution. It was a ridiculous feeling of pride over a simple task, but it was potent. I felt a connection to him, a sense of partnership that was probably entirely one-sided, but it felt real to me. That night, a storm rolled in. The sky, which had been a clear, bleached blue all day, turned a bruised, angry purple. The wind picked up, whipping through the open bay door, scattering dust and stray leaves. The first drops of rain were fat and heavy, spattering against the tin roof. Then the heavens opened up. It was a full-blown summer thunderstorm, the kind that feels biblical. The rain came down in solid sheets, and the thunder was so loud it shook the tools on the walls. A flash of lightning was followed by an instantaneous crack of thunder, and the lights in the garage flickered, then died. We were plunged into darkness. Well, hell, Miles's voice came out of the blackness, calm and unbothered. I, on the other hand, had jumped a foot in the air. My heart was racing. I've always hated thunderstorms. I heard him moving around, the scuff of his boots on the concrete. A moment later, a beam of light cut through the dark. He had a heavy-duty flashlight. He played the beam around the garage, illuminating the familiar shapes of the tools and machinery, making them look strange and alien in the stark light. Power's probably out in the whole town, he said. Happens a couple times a year. Nothing to do but wait it out. He shined the light on my face, and I must have looked as scared as I felt, because his expression softened. You okay? Yeah, fine. I lied, my voice a little shaky. Just not a fan of lightning. He didn't make fun of me. He just nodded and pointed the flashlight beam toward a pair of old, worn-out armchairs in the corner that served as his office. Come on. Might as well get comfortable. He lit a couple of thick, citronella candles he had on a shelf, and their flickering light filled the small office area with a warm, wavering glow. The smell of wax and citronella mixed with the scent of rain and wet earth from outside. He pulled the big bay door most of the way down, leaving a gap at the bottom, so we could still hear and smell the storm without being soaked by it. The garage, my workplace for the past few days, was transformed. It was no longer a place of work, but a sanctuary, a cave against the raging storm. The flickering candlelight made the shadows dance, and the sound of the rain on the roof was a constant, drumming rhythm. Miles disappeared into a small back room and returned with a thermos and 2 mugs. He poured a dark, steaming liquid into them. It was coffee, strong and black. He handed me a mug, his fingers brushing mine. The familiar jolt went through me, but this time it felt different. Softer. In the intimacy of our little candlelit cave, the touch felt less accidental. We sat in the old armchairs, sipping our coffee, not speaking. The only sounds were the storm outside and the clink of our mugs. I should have been anxious, trapped in a dark garage with a man I barely knew. Instead, I felt a profound sense of calm. The world outside, with all its demands and expectations, had vanished. There was only the storm, the candlelight, and the quiet presence of the man sitting across from me. This town, I said, my voice quiet, just to break the spell of the silence. What made you stay here? Or did you grow up here? He stared into his mug for a long moment before answering. Grew up here, he said. Left for a while. Went to the city. Went to trade school. Worked in a big dealership for a few years. I was surprised. I had pictured him as a permanent fixture of this place, someone who had never known anything else. What made you come back? He took a slow sip of coffee. The candlelight carved deep shadows into the angles of his face. The noise, he said finally. It was too loud. Not just the traffic and the sirens. The people. Everyone always talking, yelling, needing something. Always in a hurry to get nowhere. He looked up and met my eyes across the small space. Out here it's quiet. You can hear things. You can hear an engine telling you what's wrong with it. You can hear the storm coming. You can hear yourself think. I knew exactly what he meant. The noise of my own life was deafening. a constant internal monologue of worry and self-doubt. Here, in this garage, that noise had faded to a whisper. My dad got sick, he continued, his voice even softer. I came back to help with the shop. He passed away a couple years back. I just stayed. It's a good life. It's an honest life. I fix things. People are grateful. It's enough. It was the most he had ever said to me, more than all our other conversations combined. He was sharing a piece of himself, a small, vulnerable part, and I felt an overwhelming urge to protect it. He wasn't just the stoic, capable mechanic anymore. He was a man who had made a choice, a man who understood the value of quiet. What about you? He asked, turning the question back on me. You seem like you're in a hurry to get somewhere. The question was direct, perceptive. It cut through my flimsy excuse about the fishing trip. I wasn't in a hurry to get somewhere. I was in a hurry to get away. I don't know what I'm doing, I admitted, the confession tasting strange and liberating on my tongue. I have a job that pays the bills but doesn't feed my soul. I live in a city that's supposed to be exciting but just makes me feel lonely. I thought it would change something. But I was just driving, just running the engine. Sometimes you just need to stop, he said, his gaze intense. Let the engine cool. We sat in silence again, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was filled with the weight of our shared confessions. The storm outside began to subside, the thunder moving off into the distance, the rain softening to a gentle patter. The power was still out. The candles still flickered. I am sitting here, in the dark, with this man. My heart is a slow, heavy drum in my chest. He's not looking at me anymore. His gaze is fixed on the flames of the candles. I watch the light play across his face, the strong line of his jaw, the curve of his lips. A wave of pure, unadulterated yearning washes over me, so powerful it makes me dizzy. I want to reach across the small space between us. I want to touch his face. I want to know if his skin is as warm as it looks. What is happening to me? This is insane. I've known him for 4 days. He's my mechanic. He's a quiet, straight guy in a small town who fixes things. And I'm me, a mess of anxieties and unspoken desires. But in this moment, in the aftermath of the storm, none of that seems to matter. All that matters is the space between our chairs, a chasm of possibility that is both terrifying and beautiful. He finally looks up, and his eyes find mine in the dim light. And for the first time, his expression is not unreadable. I see it. I see a reflection of my own yearning, a quiet question in his gaze. My breath hitches. The air grows thick, heavy. It's no longer just the two of us waiting out a storm. It's something else. Something is about to happen. But the moment is broken. A set of headlights sweeps across the front of the garage, followed by the sound of an engine and a car door slamming. A voice calls out Miles's name. He blinks, and the look in his eyes is gone, replaced by his usual neutral mask. He gets up and walks to the bay door, lifting it just enough to talk to whoever is outside. The spell is shattered. I'm left alone in the candlelight, my heart pounding, the ghost of that shared look still hanging in the air. The new parts arrived the next morning on a delivery truck that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet town. Miles signed for the box and carried it inside, placing it on his workbench with a solid thud. The sound felt like a gavel, signaling the end of my strange little interlude in Harmony Creek. He opened the box, and there they were, a new fuel pump and a carburetor rebuild kit. The tangible solution to my problem. The tools of my departure. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I didn't want to leave. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The thought of getting back in my truck, of driving away from this garage, away from him, felt like a kind of exile. My old life, the one I had been so desperate to escape from, now felt like the one I was running back to, and I was no longer sure I wanted to get there. Miles set to work immediately, his focus absolute. He was back in his element, all business. The easy camaraderie of the stormy night, the shared vulnerability in the candlelight, it all felt like a dream. He was the mechanic again, and I was the customer, waiting for my vehicle. I tried to help, handing him tools, but my movements were clumsy, my mind elsewhere. He seemed to sense my distraction. "You can go wait at the diner if you want," he said, not looking up from his intricate work on the carburetor. "This is the tedious part. It'll take a few hours." It was a dismissal, polite and professional. He was putting the wall back up between us. I wanted to protest, to say I didn't mind waiting, that I preferred the smell of grease to the diner's stale coffee. But the words wouldn't come. I just nodded mutely and walked out of the garage, the bright sunlight feeling harsh and unwelcome. I was sitting in a booth at the diner, pushing a rubbery-looking piece of pie around my plate, when a couple of local men came in. They sat at the counter, their voices loud in the quiet room. They were talking about the storm, about a fallen tree, and then their conversation shifted. They were talking about someone who had moved away, a young man from the town. "Heard he's living in the city now," one of them said, a sneer in his voice. "With a roommate." He put a pointed emphasis on the word roommate. The other man chuckled, a nasty, wet sound. "Yeah, I bet. One of them fellas, I always knew it. Too artistic." The casual, ugly prejudice of it hit me like a slap. My face grew hot. I hunched over my pie, suddenly feeling exposed, conspicuous. I was from the city. I was artistic in my own way. Their words weren't about me, but they were for me. They were a reminder of the world outside the bubble of the garage, a world where difference was a cause for suspicion and contempt. I glanced up, and I saw Miles standing in the doorway of the diner. He must have come to get me, or to grab a coffee. He was looking at the two men at the counter, and his face was like stone. His jaw was clenched, his eyes narrowed to slits. It was an expression I'd never seen on him before. It was cold, hard fury. He wasn't looking at me, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that his anger was on my behalf. He had heard them. The two men at the counter hadn't noticed him yet. Miles took a step into the diner. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, his presence filling the room. He was bigger than both of them, and he radiated a quiet, dangerous energy. The men finally looked over, and their laughter died in their throats. They saw the look on his face. One of them shifted uncomfortably on his stool. "Miles," he said, forcing a friendly tone. "Just talking about the storm." Miles didn't answer. He just held their gaze. The silence stretched for a full 10 seconds, thick with unspoken threat. The men exchanged a nervous glance. Then, the first one cleared his throat, threw a few bills on the counter, and stood up. "Well, gotta get back to it," he muttered, not looking at anyone. His friend followed suit, and they practically scurried out of the diner, their bravado completely evaporated. Miles watched them go. Then his eyes met mine across the room. The anger was gone, replaced by that familiar, unreadable steadiness. But something had shifted. He had defended me. He had stood up for me without a single word. He had seen a potential threat, a source of ugliness directed at my world, and he had neutralized it with nothing but his sheer presence. He was a protector. He walked over to my booth and slid in across from me. He just looked at me for a moment. "Truck's almost done," he said, his voice low. "Just need to test it out. Thought you might want to come for the ride." The ride. The test drive. It felt like so much more than that. It felt like a final exam, a last chance. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. We drove in my truck. My grandfather's truck. The engine purred with a smooth, healthy sound it hadn't made in years. It felt alive again. Miles was behind the wheel, his hands resting easily on the steering wheel my grandfather's hands had worn smooth. I sat in the passenger seat, hyper-aware of his proximity in the small cab. His knee was only inches from mine. I could smell the clean, soapy scent from where he'd washed the grease from his hands. He didn't drive on the main highway. He turned onto a narrow, winding road that led up into the hills surrounding the town. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy of pine trees, dappling the road in light and shadow. Neither of us spoke. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the crunch of tires on the gravel shoulder when he pulled over. We were at a scenic overlook. The whole valley spread out below us, a patchwork of green fields and dark forest. The town of Harmony Creek was a tiny collection of rooftops in the distance. It was beautiful, peaceful, and the silence was absolute. He turned off the engine. The sudden quiet was deafening. "Run's good," he said, his eyes on the horizon. "Should get you all the way north. And back again. And back again." The words hung in the air between us. He was giving me an opening, a possible future that included a return trip. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The tipping point. The moment where everything could change or stay exactly the same. Fear and hope waged a war in my chest. Fear of rejection, of misreading everything, of making a fool of myself. But the hope was a fierce, desperate thing. I turned to look at him. He was already looking at me. That intense, soul-deep gaze. The rest of the world fell away. There was only the cab of this old truck and the man sitting beside me. The man who fixed things. The man who understood silence. The man who had defended my honor without a word. "I don't want to go," I said. The confession was a quiet breath, barely audible. But in the stillness of the truck, it sounded like a shout. His expression didn't change, but I saw something shift in the depths of his eyes. A flicker of vulnerability. A hint of the same fear that was paralyzing me. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The air was charged, humming with everything we hadn't said for the past 5 days. The longing, the observation, the near misses, the shared moments of quiet understanding. It had all been leading to this. Right here. Right now. I'm losing my mind. Say something, Leo. Do something. Don't let this moment pass. Don't get back on the road and spend the rest of your life wondering, what if this quiet, solid man is the calmest place I have ever been? Don't run away from it. He is so still. He's waiting. He's letting me make the choice. He's always let me make the choice, from the moment he told me to hop in beside him. He instigates, he creates the opportunity, but he never pushes. He lets me close the final distance. And so I do. I leaned across the space between us. It felt like crossing a continent. Time seemed to slow down, every tiny movement magnified. I watched his eyes, searching for any sign of rejection, any hint that I was wrong. I saw none. I only saw a quiet anticipation. I saw a reflection of my own fragile hope. My hand came up, and I hesitated for a fraction of a second before touching his face. His skin was rough with a day's worth of stubble and warm from the sun. He didn't flinch. He didn't move at all, except for a slight parting of his lips. A quiet invitation. That was all I needed. I closed the remaining distance and pressed my mouth to his. It wasn't a Hollywood kiss. There was no sudden explosion of passion, no cinematic sweep of music. It was quiet. It was hesitant. It was clumsy and real. My lips were dry, and his tasted faintly of coffee and salt. For a moment, it was just the gentle, uncertain pressure of my mouth against his. And then he responded. He made a soft sound in the back of his throat, a low rumble of affirmation. His hand, which had been resting on the steering wheel, came up to cup the back of my neck, his calloused fingers tangling in my hair. The touch was possessive and gentle all at once. He pulled me closer, deepening the kiss. It was no longer hesitant. It was deliberate. It was a kiss of profound, bone-deep recognition. It was a kiss that said, "Finally, I've been waiting." It was a conversation without words. All the questions I'd had, all the anxieties, all the overthinking, it all melted away in the simple, undeniable truth of his mouth on mine. This was right. This wasn't something I had imagined or projected. This was real. His thumb stroked the sensitive skin behind my ear, sending shivers down my spine. The world outside the truck, the valley below, the entire state, it all ceased to exist. Our world had shrunk to the space between his hands, the taste of his lips, the soft sound of his breathing. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. I rested my forehead against his, my eyes closed. I could feel his breath on my face, warm and steady. I could feel the rhythmic thump of his heart through his chest. "Leo," he whispered, his voice thick. I opened my eyes. He was looking at me, his face inches from mine. And for the first time, his expression was completely open, completely readable. It was filled with a tenderness that made my own heart ache. "Stay," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a plea. A simple, one-word request that held the weight of 1,000 unspoken feelings. "Okay," I breathed. Just okay. It was all I could manage, but it was enough. It was everything. The drive back down the mountain was as silent as the drive up, but the quality of the silence had changed completely. It was no longer fraught with tension and unspoken questions. It was a comfortable, contented silence, filled with the quiet hum of a new beginning. I kept stealing glances at him. The set of his jaw seemed softer, the lines around his eyes less guarded. He caught me looking once, and that small, private smile touched his lips. My stomach did a slow, happy flip. He didn't drive back to the motel. He drove to the garage, pulled my truck into its usual spot, and killed the engine. He didn't get out right away. He just sat there, his hands on the wheel, looking at the small, neat house that was attached to the back of the garage. His house. I followed his gaze. I'd barely noticed the house before, seeing it only as an extension of the shop. Now, it looked different. It looked like a home. There were tomato plants in pots on the small front porch and a worn-out welcome mat by the door. He finally turned to me. I should make us some dinner, he said, the words coming out a little awkwardly. It was endearing to see him, this bastion of quiet competence, fumbling for what came next. The script had been thrown out. We were in new territory now. We walked into his house, and it was exactly what I should have expected. It was clean, sparse, and functional. The furniture was old but solid, made of dark wood. There were no useless decorations, no clutter. But it wasn't cold. It was filled with him. A stack of well-read paperbacks on a side table. A framed photo of an older couple who I assumed were his parents on the mantelpiece. The faint, lingering scent of coffee and sawdust. It was a quiet, peaceful space. It felt safe. He cooked, and I watched. He moved around his small kitchen with the same unhurried efficiency he displayed in the garage. He made a simple meal of grilled chicken and roasted vegetables, but he prepared it with care, his movements precise. I offered to help, but he just shook his head and pointed me toward the small kitchen table. "You're the guest," he said, the corner of his mouth twitching. We ate at the table, the setting sun casting a warm, golden light through the window. The awkwardness had returned, a slight stiffness in our conversation. We were two strangers who had just shared something incredibly intimate, and now we had to figure out how to talk about the weather. We talked about the truck, about the town, about everything and nothing. It was stilted, but underneath it, there was a current of pure, unadulterated happiness. After dinner, I helped him with the dishes. We stood side by side at the sink, me washing, him drying. Our shoulders brushed. Our hands bumped as I passed him a wet plate. Each touch was a small, electric reminder of what had happened on the mountain. When the last dish was dried and put away, a new kind of silence fell. The silence of expectation. The question of what now, what next, hung in the air. He turned to me, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He looked tired. The long day, the emotional weight of it, was etched on his face. You can take the bed," he said, gesturing toward a closed door. "I'll take the couch." My heart sank a little. It was a polite, gentlemanly offer, but it also felt like a step back, a re-establishment of boundaries. But then I looked at his face, really looked, and I saw the uncertainty in his eyes. He wasn't pushing me away. He was scared, just like me. He was afraid of moving too fast, of misreading the situation, of breaking this fragile new thing between us. "Or," I said, my voice softer than I intended, "we could share." The look of relief that washed over his face was so profound it almost buckled my knees. He gave a small, shaky nod. His bedroom was as simple as the rest of the house. A queen-sized bed with a plain blue comforter, a wooden dresser, a single window looking out into the dark yard. There was nothing on the walls. It was a room for sleeping, nothing more. Getting ready for bed felt like the most nerve-wracking thing I had ever done. We moved around the small room, trying not to bump into each other, a strange dance of awkward courtesy. I brushed my teeth in his bathroom, using the travel-sized toothpaste from my bag. I saw his razor on the edge of the sink, his toothbrush next to it. The simple domesticity of it all was overwhelming. This was his space, his life, and he was letting me into it. When we finally got into bed, we lay on our backs, a careful 6 inches of space between us, staring up at the dark ceiling. The only light was a sliver of moonlight coming through the window. I could hear the crickets outside. I could hear the quiet, steady rhythm of his breathing. My own heart was a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I was so aware of him, of the heat of his body so close to mine, of the sheer, solid reality of him. I don't know how long we lay there in silence. It could have been minutes or an hour. My mind was racing. Was this a mistake? Did he regret this? Was he just being polite? The old anxieties, the familiar chorus of self-doubt, started to creep back in. Then, I felt him shift. He rolled onto his side, facing me. I turned to face him, my heart in my throat. In the dim moonlight, I could just make out the shape of his face. "I'm not good at this," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. "Words. All of this." "Me neither," I whispered back. His hand moved across the space between us, and his fingers found mine. He laced his fingers through them, his grip firm and sure. His hand was large, the palm calloused, but his touch was incredibly gentle. It was a simple gesture, but it anchored me, chasing away all the doubt. It was a promise. It was an answer. He pulled my hand to his chest, placing it over his heart. I could feel the steady, strong beat beneath my palm. It was the most honest, most vulnerable thing he could have done. "Just stay," he said again, the word thick with a meaning that went far beyond just one night. I squeezed his hand. "Okay." He shuffled closer, and this time, there was no hesitation. He wrapped his arm around me, pulling me against his chest. I rested my head in the hollow of his shoulder, my face pressed against his warm t-shirt. It smelled like him, like soap and sunshine and a faint hint of motor oil. It smelled like safety. It smelled like home. I felt his lips press against the top of my head, a soft, chaste kiss. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, the noise in my own head went completely silent. I fell asleep in his arms, feeling more peaceful than I had ever felt in my entire life. I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of bacon sizzling. For a disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. The light was different, the air smelled different. Then it all came flooding back. Miles. The truck. The kiss. The quiet intimacy of the night before. I was in his bed. Alone. A familiar spike of anxiety shot through me. He was gone. He'd woken up, regretted everything, and slipped out, leaving me to wake up alone and face the awkward morning. I sat up, my heart starting to pound that old, familiar rhythm of fear. The blue comforter was pulled around my waist. The other side of the bed was empty, the pillow still indented where his head had been. But the smell of coffee was real. The sound of sizzling was real. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic voice in my head. I swung my legs out of bed and pulled on my jeans from the day before. I walked out of the bedroom and into the kitchen. And there he was. He was standing at the stove, his back to me, wearing a fresh t-shirt and the same worn jeans. He was flipping bacon in a cast-iron skillet. A coffee pot was gurgling on the counter. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He hadn't run. He was making breakfast. He must have heard me, because he turned his head and looked at me over his shoulder. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes were soft. "Morning," he said, his voice still thick with sleep. "Coffee's ready." The relief was so potent, so overwhelming, that I felt lightheaded. All my carefully constructed morning after anxieties crumbled to dust. He wasn't regretting it. He wasn't awkward. He was just Miles, making breakfast. "Morning," I replied, my voice a little hoarse. I walked over to the counter and poured myself a mug of coffee. My hands were shaking slightly. I leaned against the counter, taking a sip, the hot, bitter liquid a welcome shock to my system. We didn't talk much while he cooked, and I drank my coffee. We didn't need to. The easy, comfortable silence was back, even more settled than before. It was a domestic silence, the kind shared by people who are comfortable in each other's space. I watched him crack eggs into the skillet, his movements economical and sure. I found myself thinking that I could watch this man make breakfast every morning for the rest of my life. The thought was so sudden, so certain, that it startled me. We ate at the small kitchen table again, the plates warm, the bacon crisp, the eggs perfectly cooked. It was the best breakfast I'd ever had. "So," I said, after a few minutes of chewing in contented silence. I had to ask. I had to know. "My truck. It's fixed." He nodded, not looking up from his plate. "Yep. Good as new. Better, maybe. So I don't really have a reason to stay anymore," I said, testing the waters. My heart was in my throat. He finally looked up, his gaze pinning me to my chair. He put his fork down. "I can think of a reason," he said, his voice low and steady. And that was it. That was the reassurance. That was the confirmation that last night wasn't a fluke, that the kiss on the mountain wasn't a moment of temporary insanity. It was real. What was growing between us was real. But the test was still there. The truck was fixed. My old life was waiting. The open road was a tangible, tempting thing. The plan had been to go north, to scatter the ashes, to find some kind of closure. What did I do now? After breakfast, I walked out to the garage. My truck was sitting there, clean and whole. Miles had even washed the dust and grime from the body. It gleamed in the morning light. The keys were in the ignition. All I had to do was get in, turn the key, and drive away. I could be on the highway in 5 minutes, back on my way to my planned life, my planned grief. I opened the driver's side door and stood there for a long moment, my hand on the worn metal. I looked at the steering wheel, the cracked dashboard, the faded seat cover. This truck was my grandfather's legacy. It was my last connection to him. And what he had valued most in his life was honesty. Hard work. Not running away from things. He had stayed in one place, built a life, loved one woman. He was a man who knew how to be still. I had been using this truck, as an excuse to run. But what if the real tribute to his memory wasn't to finish the journey? What if it was to stop? To finally put down roots? To be brave enough to build something, instead of just driving past the ruins of what used to be? Miles came out of the house and stood on the porch, drying his hands on a towel. He didn't come any closer. He just stood there, watching me. He wasn't going to ask me to stay again. He wasn't going to pressure me. The choice had to be mine. He had fixed my truck. Now I had to fix myself. I looked from the truck to him. He was leaning against the porch railing, his arms crossed, his expression calm and patient. He was a solid, immovable point in a world that had always felt like it was shifting under my feet. He was the quiet I had been searching for. I closed the truck door. The click was loud, final. I walked away from the truck, away from the open road. I walked across the gravel driveway, up the 2 short steps to his porch, and stopped in front of him. "You got any more of that coffee?" I asked, a smile finally breaking across my face. The relief in his eyes was a beautiful thing to see. He returned my smile, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his entire face. "I can always make more," he said. And I knew I was home. The journey wasn't about getting to a destination on a map. It was about finding a place to stop. The ashes could wait. My grandfather, I think, would have understood. He would have liked Miles. He would have recognized in him the same quiet strength, the same honest heart that he himself had possessed. The days that followed settled into a new kind of rhythm. A rhythm of us. I moved my things from the Pine Cone Motel into his spare room, though I spent most nights in his bed. I called my boss and told them I was taking an extended leave of absence, that I'd found something I needed to work on. It was vague, but it was the truest thing I'd said in years. I still spent my days at the garage. But now, I wasn't just a bystander. Miles started to teach me things. He showed me how to change the oil, how to read a tire's pressure, how to diagnose a problem not just by sight, but by sound and smell. I was a clumsy student, but a willing one. My hands, once soft and clean, started to develop their own small calluses, their own faint, permanent lines of grease. I felt a pride in them I'd never felt before. Our intimacy was a quiet, slow-blooming thing. It wasn't built on grand pronouncements or dramatic gestures. It was built in the small moments. In the way he'd bring me a cold bottle of water without me having to ask. In the way I'd have a hot cup of coffee waiting for him when he came inside for a break. It was in the comfortable silence as we sat on his porch in the evenings, watching the fireflies begin to blink in the twilight. It was in the way he would reach for my hand in the middle of the night, his touch a silent reassurance even in sleep. One evening, we took our truck, and drove back up to the overlook. We sat on the hood, the metal still warm from the sun, and watched the sky bleed from orange to purple. He wrapped his arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. "I never thought." I started, then trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. "Me neither," he said, understanding what I couldn't articulate. "I thought my life was set. This shop, this town. I thought this was all there was. Is it enough?" I asked, my voice small. He turned and looked at me, his face serious in the fading light. He brought his free hand up and tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear, his touch feather-light. "It wasn't," he said softly, "but it is now." And in that moment, I understood. My life hadn't been broken, just stalled. I needed a new part, a new direction. I thought I was running from my loneliness, but I was actually running toward him. The breakdown on the side of the road wasn't an ending. It was an intervention. A twist of fate engineered by a rusty fuel pump and a 40-year-old Ford. I leaned my head on his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. The quiet of the valley washed over us. For the first time, I felt no urge to run, no restlessness, no anxiety about what came next. The future was an unknown road, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to travel it. Because I wouldn't be traveling it alone. I was sitting on top of the world, next to a man who had fixed my grandfather's truck, and in doing so, had fixed the quiet, broken parts of me. I had hopped in beside him, and I had a feeling I was never getting out.